Good evening. My name is Joelle Magyar. I'm superintendent here at Avon Lake City Schools. I'd like to welcome you to our third community meeting of this school year. Tonight, we will be talking a lot about changes that we have made to our building project and talk a little bit about some significant things that we've done in our district to right size as well as keep our costs down. So I'm going to start off with introducing Mrs. Cheryl Fisher. She is working with TDA, who is our architect firm, on our building project. So Cheryl.
Projecting? I feel like this is the biggest accomplishment of the year for me. All right. So great introduction. We have a short about 30-minute presentation tonight to talk to you about updates to the master plan. So we were hired earlier in the year. It was a different architecture firm involved in the previous plan, but we were hired this year to take another look at it, a fresh set of eyes. And try to create a master plan that was more acceptable for the community of Avon Lake City Schools. And just a really quick tidbit, I was born in Avon Lake. I grew up in Avon Lake Schools, so this is really sentimental to me. We moved when I was in high school, but this is my home. So I understand the passion and the questions and the environment. I get it. So tonight we're going to talk briefly about the goals and objectives that we had as we started this endeavor a few months ago. But we're going to spend the bulk of our presentation talking about updates to the master plan. How can we tweak it to be more palatable to the community, and what those components and pieces are. That'll be the bulk of our discussion, at least in terms of presentation. Then we're going to talk about daily operations in the Avon Lake City Schools, but then we'll open it up to Q&A afterwards so we can answer your questions, because I'm sure you're going to have a lot of them. So, goals for the master plan. As we entered this several months ago, it became apparent in the very beginning that the facilities committee, who had been charged with developing the previous master plan in conjunction with a different architect, really placed a lot of time and work. And this committee was made up of staff, of teachers, of parents, of grandparents, of a very broad cross-section of community members of the demographics of Avon Lake. And there was a survey conducted after the bond issue failed, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. DB, there was like 1,200 respondents, right? This was an online survey. And the results of that survey was one of the first things we looked at. And the results showed that the majority, and a very large majority of the people, felt that the components or the concept of the master plan, they agreed with. The heartburn lied within the cost, and they wanted to see some reduction in costs. So that was our main goal, to maintain the integrity and the components of the plan that this community-based facilities committee came up with. We also had new enrollment projections that came into play around the same timing that we were brought on board, so this was great data. Enrollment projections are the heart of master planning because they allow us to appropriately right-size the buildings based on the data available at the time. Nobody can predict 50 years ahead, right? Enrollment projections typically go about 10 years, but those are the heaviest data point that we rely on. While that's going on, we also have now passed so much time since the finalization of the last master plan, which was early last year. We have new cost sets available from the state, so we looked at that, and it's kind of working against us in this initiative, right? So we looked at the new cost updates that actually came in about 4-6 weeks ago, and then we also distilled it further and looking at regional costs, because the market in Cincinnati, for example, is much different than the market in Cleveland versus Toledo versus Lorain County. So we distilled that even further. And then again, one of our main goals and objectives was to identify opportunities for cost savings. Again, going to that first opening comment, that's what the survey provided for us. So let's talk about enrollment projections. So what you can see here on this slide at the bottom are school years, starting with 2022 and going all the way up to 2027 and 28. And I think the projections, did they go out even?
They went out another year.
They went out a little further. And then here, this column represents enrollment. So you can see in 2021-22 school year, the district, was it PK or K-12? District-wide, yeah, was 3,826 students enrolled in Avon Lake City Schools. And the following year, it dropped to 3,695 and so forth. And the 24-25 school year is where we start seeing the projections. So now this was an outside firm that the district hired, and their expertise is in enrollment projections, and they do this nationally, not just here in Ohio. So they're a very fairly recognized, esteemed firm. As we look at the next few years in projections, you could see that we're going down to 3,465 students, so around a 400 student loss, plus or minus, district-wide. So the point of this is just to say that as we re-looked and revisited this master plan from our viewpoint and set point, we saw the opportunity that maybe the original plan was a little too big, a little too large. It was based on different enrollment projections. But I also want to point out this is not uncommon to what is happening to the majority of school districts in Ohio. This has been the trend for the majority of them, and I know there's a few school districts in this area like Ridgeville, Avon, who have been experiencing a different trend, but this is not, this is what we expected to see. It is not uncommon. So we're going to walk through now. I told you kind of what our objectives were in updating the plan. So let's talk about what those updates were. And the biggest one was about pre-K enrollment, beyond the enrollment projections, the pre-K component. In the previous plan, it called for 2 new elementary schools, one at Troy site, one at Eastview site, and they were equal in terms of enrollment and grade configurations. So we had the same square foot, the same enrollment, and the same grade configurations at each school. So we looked at, what are the benefits to consolidating preschool into just one of those schools? And we saw many opportunities, both from an economic standpoint. So now we don't have to duplicate like the support spaces, such as I'll throw out a gross motor skills room for pre-K at both schools, because if they're all together, then we only need one. So that's the type of thought process we were going through. But the biggest benefit we saw was to the educational component. So we saw a lot of opportunities for teacher collaboration, for maximizing the pre-K resources and staff. And then when we started looking at the logistics of it, we know that Troy, and I should have prefaced that, we're talking about the pre-K going to the Troy site. It is a much larger site. Maybe by 10 acres, something like that. And it made sense to have, now that we're consolidating preschool, that school will be bigger, it made sense to have the larger school at the larger site. And when we looked at the previous growth information, growth and decline, the majority of the growth has, in recent years, been focused on the west side, where the Troy school is located. So it made sense for many reasons to consolidate pre-K to the Troy site. Well, we make one school bigger by adding all pre-K to that. Obviously, one school gets smaller, and for a couple reasons, but keeping focused on the pre-K, removing that from the Eastview site, now we have a K through 5 school proposed at the Eastview site, and the benefits we saw were more logistic to construction and the actual placement of the school, and Ryan will talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. But the biggest thing we saw, and this was also a result of the survey, people had concerns about the added traffic of the school that was going to be about 116,000 square feet in the previous plan at the Lear Road site. So by making this school smaller, that reduces that, less students coming in, less buses, less parents, less teachers, and so forth. So that will help minimize that concern. And then there were also advantages to building a smaller school here in terms of the actual construction process. So it is a small site. It makes the construction logistics a little more challenging if we have a bigger school compared to a smaller school, because the schools are going to stay open while construction is taking place. So now we have to manage all that activity and existing school going on, as well as the temporary provisions for construction. So let's look at the plan and the updates to the plan by school. And I mean for the 3 new schools, which we're still proposing 3 new schools, as well as Avon Lake High School. So after looking at the enrollment projections, we were able to reduce the square foot pretty significantly based on those projections, but still have room for growth. Please keep in mind we have always kept that forefront in our minds for unexpected growth. So it looks, from how we analyzed it, for the elementary and middle school enrollment, we need about 11 classrooms per grade level. So when we look at Learwood, the new 6 through 8, that was the same grade configuration as the last plan. 11 classrooms per grade level. And when I say the word classrooms, I'm talking about the main core programs, math, language arts, science, social studies, and so forth. Plus, on top of that, all the additional support spaces that you need, such as art, special education, intervention, gymnasium, and all that. That's on top of those 11 classrooms per grade level. We are targeting 850 students for Learwood School, but I can assure you that this school can accommodate well over 1,000. If every student was placed first period amongst art in their main classrooms, you could fit over 1,000 students in this school. Now, looking at the elementary schools, so let's talk about the Troy site, which would be the site for the new PK through 5. We have 6 classrooms per grade level. Remember I said 11 per grade level, so we're going to place 6 here. We're going to place 5 in the new Eastview to make that school smaller. And again, have all that additional support space that we need. We're anticipating about 984 students at the Troy site, and that is very, very close to what it was in the last plan. So we've only reduced it very, very minimal. And then the biggest change, though, really impacted Eastview, the new elementary school there. 5 classrooms per grade level, plus all your support spaces, an anticipated of 625 students. And again, all these have room for growth. This is the number that we used as a target for planning. Moving along to the last parts of the update for Avon Lake High School, part of the survey results indicated that people weren't so warm and fuzzy about having additions for district administration and so forth. And, you know, the school technically is oversized for the enrollment projections and the current enrollment. So we felt very comfortable about removing those additions from the project, which also included weight room addition and athletic storage. And then lastly on this slide, we did not, go into this endeavor and say slash, cut, remove. We really were looking at what is the best plan for the district moving forward long term, and how can we touch every district and make this plan cohesive and efficient, but still palatable to the voters. So we actually added some things. And part of that was at Avon Lake High School, roof replacement, which is needed in certain areas of the building that limited PI funds are preventing from being done right now. We had one of our engineers take a look at the mechanical systems in the building, which were already flagged to us as a cause of concern. So we had that augmented a bit so that the critical components of the mechanical system are to be replaced in this plan to protect the integrity of that system now and for years to come. Moving down to Learwood here, this building. In the previous plan, it was a new middle school, and the it's over here, right? 2010. In the 2010, turn around, 2010, it wasn't here when I went to school, that's why I'm turning, the 2010 auxiliary gym that was constructed was to remain, but it was not connected to the new building, and we had a lot of conversation about that and had concerns. Number one, priority was safety and security. And then additionally, we're in Ohio, we know how it gets in the winter. I say winter, but it's actually 6 months of the year that we could actually have snow. It just made sense to add additional square foot to connect those buildings together. So we have added that. Lastly, examining the program of requirement, and that's identifying what spaces are going in the building and how big they are. We saw that the previous plan didn't have sensory rooms in the elementary schools, and those are really now a common and vital part of the educational program, not just for special needs students, but for all the students and their well-being, as well as a gross motor skills room for grade PK. Lastly, we talked about adding, and we did, addressing the security entry at the high school for the students that come in throughout the day through the student dining area and where the administration is, and augmenting that and making it a more safe and secure system throughout the day. So to wrap, I threw a lot at you. So to wrap that up, let's look at what the old plan was and the cost. We're going to talk dollars and cents and square foot for the next 2 slides. This is the previous plan. So we had a new 6 through 8 middle school. It was proposed to be 142,000 square feet. Then we had our 2 new elementary schools, both being PK through 5, equal size of 116,000 square feet. We had the high school additions that I just talked about earlier, as well as renovations. And then we had abatement and demolition. Abatement means removing any hazardous material. Commonly, it's asbestos, and is not dangerous as long as it's well protected, as these schools are. So removing the asbestos abatement, and then demolition of the schools that are going offline. That had a total cost of about $170 million. That's what was on the ballot last November. Now, looking at the changes to the plan that I just kind of high-level summary identified and outlined. We have a reduction in the square foot for Learwood for this school, down from 142,000 square feet down to 128. And again, this is a direct impact of those enrollment projections. For our elementary schools, we've moved all of PK here to the Troy site. And we're still at a less square foot than we were at the previous plan. Not much, but again, we're consolidating all of pre-K there. So almost 116,000 square feet. But the biggest reduction you can see is at the new elementary school, now becoming a K through 5 at Eastview at almost 90,000 square feet. We removed the additions from the Avon Lake High School plan, but augmented the renovation work. And then same abatement and demolition there for the schools going offline. Sans Redwood, which we removed the cost of that, and we can have some conversations in Q&A about the methodology and thought of that. Overall, we reduced the square foot of about 51.8 thousand square feet, and that resulted in a savings of about almost $15 million. So our new master plan cost is $155.7. And I have to say, this is a great challenge because construction costs have been rising dramatically over the last 3 years across the country. I mean, we all see it in groceries and just in everything. So to be able to offset it by almost $15 million, we were really excited to see that much of a savings. Lastly, just to break it down, if you're interested in how that looks per school, this slide is for you. So you can see, the smaller school, Eastview, costs the least because it's a cost per square foot, whereas the new Learwood Middle School costs the most because it's the biggest. And after we layer in the renovations to the high school, the abatement and demolition, that's how we arrive at $155.7 million. So Ryan, I'm going to turn off, hopefully.
Hello. All right. Thank you.
Do you need this or you want me to work it?
No, I'll do it. Thank you. I'm Ryan Schmidt with TDA Architecture. I am a project architect. I work on all sizes of schools, all scopes of work, from simplest little door replacement all the way up to very large schools, multiple schools at a time. and I am fortunate enough to work with Cheryl on a lot of this stuff. So she provided a lot of good information. What my role here is to obviously go through and work with her on the program pieces. There's a lot of information in there that we work through, but then also look at the plans and how they would fit on the sites, how logistically, how you could make these projects take place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the 3 site plans and kind of talk through the philosophies of the site plans and how things currently lay out in this concept. Please keep in mind these are just conceptual. There's no design in these. This is more of a plan to understand the potential for the sites, and it will not look like this at the end of the day. These are really, again, those exercises you go through to make sure you can do something. So what we're seeing here first, this is Eastview. And there we go there. The road's out here. Presently, the school kind of sits in this area right here. And then this is some playground space and then some grassy area in the back. So really the concept that we try to do is, first of all, oops, sorry. I went too far. There we go. My thumbs are too big. What we try to do, first of all, is maintain the existing school. There are so many logistic issues with trying to move students out of a building. It puts the kids in a spot where their school age experience for that 1.5, 2 years, 2.5 years that it takes to construct a building is dramatically altered. It's not the end of the world. Kids go through that all the time, but whenever you have the opportunity to maintain an existing school and give those students a true school experience is the best thing you can do for those students. On top of that, it saves a ton of money. So it's very fortunate that we do have 3 sites where you do have a lot of space and area to construct while schools are still in operation. So what we do, first of all, is find the most likely spot for the school. In this case, behind the existing school would be where you do most of your construction. So as this would take place, school in the front would maintain operations as per usual. Everything would be going on out here while they're constructing a building back behind the existing structure. What you're seeing here is a representational block of square footage. So that means we went through that program that we put together and we make sure that that much space fits on the site in a way that we've had success in the past. You know, in this case, we have a 2-story academic core space. What that means is, as Cheryl mentioned, those are all your typical homeroom type spaces. Those are your English rooms, ELA spaces. Those are math rooms, things of that nature. But this would be a 2-story space at this location of the site. The other side of the building is generally all those accessory spaces. It'd be your main entrance to the building. It'd be your administrative components. It would be your gymnasium, your student dining, your art, your music, all those sorts of features that take place outside of the academic core. This model works really great from the standpoint of you have a during school section of the building where most of the students typically are, but you have a section of the building that does house a lot more after-school activities. There we go. I don't know what I did. Okay, that makes it so that you can utilize this space very effectively after school because there'll be doors to section that off and provide that separation that's very desirable so that you're not having to monitor people back in other sections of the building. And so that's like you have rec basketball or something taking place. Hello? Oh, there we're back. Okay, so that's, again, where you could utilize the dining room for signups, or you could utilize some of those additional spaces for other activities and community type elements that typically occur in a school like this, like a meeting like this. So you have those spaces here. Back behind it, we've carved out space for playground. We have outdoor learning as a placeholder in here. Typically in most of our new schools, there are spaces outside. While we don't get a ton of great weather here in some of our winter months, it is nice to be able to get students outside. I was just at a groundbreaking yesterday where the entire school was outside eating their lunches out on the sidewalks, and it was really cool to see. So it's really nice to have the potential to take students outside and utilize some of the site. And you do have sites with some really nice kind of trees and grassy elements and things of that nature, so it's good to use them. So anyway, as this building is being built, school is taking place. When this is done, this building would be demolished. And so over the course of a summer, they would go through, they would put in the new parking lot, what this is showing is a parent drive, and the new bus drive and pickup. So all of this work would take place, and this would all be ready for students to arrive in the fall when everything's all done. So it's a multi-step process to get you to where you need to be. And the other thing I really want to point out is when we do new schools, back in the old day, parents didn't drive their kids to school quite as much as they do now. A lot more kids either walked or rode buses. A lot more people drive to schools for all the various activities that kids are in. So it's very crucial to provide a separate parent pickup drop-off area separated from the buses. And that relieves a lot of stress that you would have not only on the buses being able to pull in, do the drop-offs efficiently, safely, things of that nature, but it also allows the parents to avoid kind of getting stuck behind buses as they're trying to pull in and off the site. It avoids a lot of those crossings of traffic, and it puts the students in the best place to be safe and secure on the sites. And then last but not least, we did have a big grassy area back here that we displaced. This area here, we would remain green. The idea would be that you could utilize this for more kind of field space, activity space in this iteration. This is the Troy site. Again, this is a pre-K-5. And so what this is showing is very similar concepts. So again, you have the existing school kind of sitting in here with your main entrance off the road out here. This building would be built back behind the existing building in much the same way. We're showing very similar sort of thing with a 2-story academic core space, all those accessory components like administration, dining, phys ed, things of that nature up front. And then this is the pre-K. This is a model I've used a couple of times where you have the pre-K as a component off the main entry. It's really nice because administration is able to monitor kind of entrance and acceptance into pre-K. You're able to utilize some shared resources within the two buildings, but it provides a separate pre-K space. We have done projects where we have connected it to kindergarten when it has been beneficial to both programs. And so that's something, if there's a lot of interaction between those age groups, we've done that as well. But currently this model works very effectively. This also allows you the opportunity to have a separate pickup and drop off for pre-K. Moving across this site, very similar in nature as I mentioned before. We have space allocated for outdoor learning areas, entrance plaza on this one. This site has a big area of grass across the back with a lot of fields. So we reconfigured the fields down at the bottom and picked up a little space over here in what would be an inefficient parking lot in this configuration. We have playground kind of tucked back away from the edges of the site. Playgrounds in this iteration, you'd actually be able to utilize bus pickup and drop off as asphalt area for the playgrounds with a gate separating it and preventing traffic from going back there during those hours. So you're getting kind of double use of some of these spaces. And then tucking pre-K back behind the building or directly adjacent to pre-K so those little kids have direct access to that. The fields count is very similar to what is currently there. It's just reconfigured in this plan. And then you're seeing here, this is a bus pickup drop-off in this location here. Again, separated from the main parent and visitor pickup and drop-off at the front of the site. We're also looking at a connector road up here. It could potentially help alleviate some traffic if that is desirable. It could also be something where if there's ever some sort of a situation, you would be able to have a secondary means off the site. So, and I want to point out too, we did these as these kind of placeholder exercises. Whenever the project would be approved and somebody actually is working on design for these, we do meet with life safety services, we meet with the city, we meet with all the entities that have input on not only engagement within the community, but all those civic responsibilities and aspects, engineering, and all those sorts of things that are necessary to make sure the project functions properly for the next 50 to 100 years. And then last but not least, here's Learwood. And what you're seeing here, This is the existing building in this location. This is where that 2010 gym is, that gym. And then you're seeing, this is all that kind of shared space, phys ed, administration, dining, all those spaces that I talked about previously. Academic 2-story core space here. This is really nice in that it does pull some of these spaces back towards some of your playing fields a little bit more than they are now. So there would be the potential for better interaction between those two spaces, which I really like. It does provide, in this case, a separate parent pickup drop-off with visitor parking up front, your bus pickup drop-off along the south side of the site, maintaining the bulk of parking where it currently is, and then picking up some additional green space up towards the front of the site. And this could be done a bunch of different ways. We have it called playing fields now, but that could be, kind of a big kind of boulevard walk, along the bus pickup drop-off that connects, the street sidewalk all the way back to the stadium, with the students being able to pick up and drop off, along with some space, out front that could be really nice and multi-used. One last thing to point out, this does maintain the existing stadium and fields that are at the back of the site. There's no desire to get rid of any of those amenities. Next thing I'm going to do is kind of run through some spaces, kind of modern school spaces, just to give you a flavor of, what is out there right now, what's kind of the current standard for schools. Everything we've talked through, this is about providing good quality educational spaces. This is not about building the Taj Mahal. This is not about being budget, pinching every penny. This is about making a very nice, durable, usable school that will last a long time and serve your students as well as possible. The other thing is about being flexible. It's about having spaces that you can reconfigure over time, having the electrical, the data, the technology built into these buildings so that as everything in education changes over the next 25 years, we have the capacity to absorb some of those changes and be as efficient and on the cutting edge as possible. So I will kind of run through these. What you see a lot is multifunction, a lot of different types of furniture, a lot of different types of space, lots of daylight in most of these areas. You're looking at new modernized lighting and air conditioning and wireless access points and security cameras and all of those sorts of things that make a modern school function as well as possible. The other thing is in this new kind of modern environment, students learn through a collaborative process a lot more maybe than when I was a kid, which is a nice thing because that's exactly what I do on a daily basis. I collaborate with people, I work with people, it's all project-based education. So having spaces where students can interact, learn interaction skills, talk, work on projects together like this space, this is an extended learning area outside some classrooms, is a really nice feature. Within the spaces, again, you have all the typical amenities that you'd have in a typical space. You provide all the furniture and things of that nature that are common in any educational space. The other things that we like to do is this is about flexibility in this particular instance. This was one where the client desired the opportunity to be able to open a classroom into a common space and have these kind of interactive groups going on between spaces. So again, that's working with the staff, with the teachers, with the students to really hone in on those components that make Avon Lake schools unique and how they want to educate for the next 50 years. STEM labs, this is a growing component in most schools. Again, this is kind of taking shop class and turning it on its head a little bit. I like it because it's something where it teaches kids hands-on skills and kind of some of the more modern aspects of technology and art and design and things of that nature. But this is kind of a gateway to some of those CTE programs and things of that nature as well. So it's a really nice kind of bridge between those types of education. Here's another space, very similar, again, providing all the componentry so the kids can work on projects and really learn with their hands and think through projects and process. Media centers and libraries, they kind of go hand in hand anymore. They have changed so much over the last probably 20, 30 years. But the idea that you make multifaceted spaces that students really want to go to that are no longer just, an archive for old, Hardy Boy books, the great books, but you need other things in these spaces now that interest modern kids. And part of that is bridged through technology. It's bridged through the type of reading they actually like to do, and it's providing spaces where they can do it in a way that is more appealing to the youth of today. There's a slide here. Moving through, this was actually a renovation I did. It was a 15-year-old building. It was practically a new building, but their library was that old library. They wanted something new that had this space. This looks like there are no books. There's books back behind this wall all the way down. So there are books in this space, but it was really about creating all these spaces for students to do the collaborative work that this school desired to be able to do, and it turned out great. Modern gymnasiums, it's just got all the key components that really make them function as effectively as possible. And with that being said, I will turn it back over to Superintendent Magyar. Thank you. You get fresh batteries.
I get fresh batteries. Do I get a clicker too?
There you go.
All right. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
So we wanted just to switch gears a little bit and talk about some things that we've done this year to reduce our expenditures. Because again, going back to the survey that we sent back out in January, people were curious, what are you doing to address your financial situation? And so we wanted to highlight some of the things that we did. And first, we started off by right-sizing our staff to match the enrollment. So you saw the enrollment data in a slide at the beginning of this presentation. And so this impacted all facets of our organization. So I know some people read about the 4 RIFs that we did in the teacher rankings, but we wanted the community to know that we didn't just look at teachers. This wasn't about that. This is right-sizing our staff to our current enrollment. So starting at central office, we eliminated 4 positions. We had 2 supervisors and 2 support staff positions that we have eliminated to start with next year. And some of them have already left this year. Certified staff at the high school, we eliminated 2.5 FTEs, and when that's full-time equivalent is what FTE stands for. At Learwood, we eliminated 2 full-time positions. Troy Intermediate School, we eliminated 2 full-time positions. K-4 elementary schools, we eliminated 5 full-time positions. And K-8 specials eliminated 1.4, for a total of over 17 positions that we have eliminated for the upcoming school year. In classified staff, we've reconfigured the copy center. So we used to have an area in our district where all teachers would send things to be copied. We've kind of reconfigured and reserviced in a different way. And we've reduced some positions to align with our enrollment. So if as kids leave, for example, some of our special needs kids, as they graduate, they have aid services that are provided to them. And so as those kids graduate from our school district, we look at whether or not we need to replace those services. By doing all of this, and again, it's not going to have an effect on class size. I know people were concerned that if we eliminated these positions, what would that look like? Between the change in the schedule at the high school, as you know, you saw, if you came to the last community presentation, you saw that we had a lot of classes that were sitting under 15 kids at the high school. Not sustainable. So in this particular, by eliminating some of these positions, we have eliminated having as many classes that have that many kids in them. So this is a total savings to the district of close to $1 million in benefits and salaries and benefits. And this is compounded. So unless these positions get replaced and we add them back in, this is a compounded savings that we have each year. To put this in perspective, and I shared it at our last community meeting as well, this is great savings for us. 1,000% great savings. Our bills each month for the school district are $4 million. So between what we pay out in salaries and benefits, our electricity, our supplies, our purchase services, we're at about $4 million a month. We are proud that we were able to save close to $1 million, but please understand that has impact on our budget, but it's not a great impact on our budget. But we needed to right size. So what are we looking at to do different this time? We have a bond issue, and as you saw in this first part of this presentation, that we scaled back the project significantly by $15 million, and most of that was in square footage, being able to do that because of our enrollment. And putting that pre-K into one site lets us use staff efficiently. So If you don't know anything about preschool in public school districts, we are required by law to start servicing kids at the age of 3 for any special need that they may have. That doesn't mean that every child in Avon Lake who is 3 years old that has a special need comes to our preschool. We also service kids itinerantly. So that means if a child has a speech need, we might send a speech pathologist out to the daycare or to another preschool that that child is at. So it doesn't mean that we do that. But because we have those other services to spread those out over 2 buildings, now we have people traveling for 2 buildings in addition to all of those facilities out in the community where we service kids itinerantly. So this really helps us keep our resources for preschool at 1 building, and it lessens our costs because we're not paying for 2 sets of occupational therapists. We're not paying for 2 sets of speech language pathologists. We only need to house it in 1 building, and we don't pay for travel time. The reduced size of the elementary school on Lear Road to address the traffic concerns. So that was something that we heard from the survey, that people were very concerned, and we heard it from our city as well, that they were concerned about the amount of traffic on Learwood. And we downsized the scope of the project at the high school. So the renovations that we're looking at expanding the Lake Center and adding some space there, we put that on hold. We are looking, so the $14 million in renovations that you saw on the previous slide would go to renovating current spaces. So not necessarily adding on to the existing building. And the operating levies, like we showed in the last slide, we reduced the expenses by really right-sizing our staff to our enrollment. We adjusted our schedules specifically at the high school. We identified some potential savings in operational costs. I probably drive Autumn a little crazy, but every time I get a contract in front of me, I'm like, do we need this? Do we still require this service? How are we servicing kids differently? So we're always questioning the need for an expense prior to us putting it on the board agenda. And we have negotiated 3-year contracts with our unions to identify the future personnel costs. So we know that. The board will be voting on the teacher's contract at their May meeting. We've already ratified a contract with our classified staff, so we know what those fixed costs are going to be moving forward. And so we're very proud. We had great negotiations with both of our unions, a very collaborative process, and we're very happy about that as well. So what's next? Where do we go from here? So we have a first ballot consideration and a vote by the board. The board needs to take 2 votes on 3 separate resolutions, but we have 2 of them combined. So the board plans to make a vote on that first consideration in the near future. Once that vote happens, we then send that information to the county auditor, and the county auditor has to certify that the numbers are correct and certify what that would look like on the ballot. Once that occurs, it comes back to the board for a second ballot consideration and a second vote. This whole process needs to be done and filed by August 7th to be placed on the November ballot. So that is the county, or actually the state deadline for filing is August 7th to get this on the ballot for November. Summer of 2024, this summer, we, Jack, myself, Ned, Autumn, and I, we're going to be going out throughout the community. We will put it out there for you and post it on our website once a week doing coffee talks. So we're going to tell you that we're at Panera this week, or we're at Emily's this week, or we're here this week, and come and have a conversation with us about anything to do with schools. It could be the building project. It could be anything you want to know about the schools. But we're going to make ourselves available to the community so you can sit down and have those personal conversations and have your questions answered as they come up. Because as more information comes up, we realize you're going to have more questions. And with school being out for the summer, it's kind of difficult and people are on vacation. So we're going to come to you out in the community. So please take advantage of one of the coffee talks. Dates will be out by the end of the month. And I think we're at a point where we're ready to take some questions. So I don't know, Cheryl and Ryan, if you guys want to, depending on what you're going to ask, and I'm going to give this to Dr. Lawver, who's going to walk around. If you have a question, just raise your hand. He'll come to you.
Hi, this is for the architects. I'm in education, and I have many friends in education, both in this district and many others, who work in brand new schools with garage doors. And they say they're the worst thing that's ever happened to education. I saw one in the picture, so I got a little nervous. And I know safety is a huge concern. Is this something that's been projected, or, I love the collaborative spaces. I work in Amherst.
Yeah.
Our Creative Learning Center was one of the first in the state, and it is phenomenal.
Sure.
I use it once a week. But those garage doors, everybody I know with them who's come from a new school has said they're awful.
Garage doors are optional. We don't make those mandatory. That's really something that's usually an owner request. So it'd be a specific district that wanted that sort of interaction. So I have not done one probably in 8 or 10 years. So yeah, that was a specific other project. So yeah, good question. Yeah.
What's the name of your architecture firm and where are you located?
TDA.
TDA?
Yep. And we are in Willoughby.
Willoughby?
Yep.
What happens with the free schools that are no longer part of the future?
The question is, what happens to the 3 schools that are no longer part of the future?
Yes, but can you update, like Redwood and I think Earview and another one?
Sorry.
So there is money built into the bond for demo and to demo some of the buildings. We had an MOU, as you know, a resolution with the city of Avon Lake for the purchase of Redwood. When the bond did not pass the first time, we just need to re-engage with them to see if this is still a want of theirs. And if it is, certainly we're going to honor that agreement that was put in place with the city of Avon Lake.
We live across the street from Troy School, and I understand that the number of students is going to increase fairly dramatically there. Already, we have a severe traffic problem most days at certain times of the day. How is that going to be addressed?
Can we both? We can. So I'm going to give you 2 answers. Before this last election for a new mayor, we were in conversations with the mayor to add yet a 3rd entry off of that property. They plan to connect a road to alleviate some of that traffic there. And I just want to remind that many of the kids that are in that increase are going to be due to preschool. Our preschool is a half-day program, so you're going to have kids there, but then you're going to have kids coming out in the middle of the day and then kids back arriving and then leaving again. So they're not all going to be there at the same time.
We're also pulling some of that traffic back farther onto the site and stacking more of it on the site instead of pulling so much off of Belmar. There's some other things that we do by moving that site back that helps alleviate traffic in the neighborhoods.
He's stealing all my thunder, but
Sorry.
that's all accurate. The other big part of it too is that separation of the bus traffic and the automotive, the car traffic. Buses are like a big dam, when you're trying to get them in and off the site, and so the opportunity to separate those, you kind of take those roadblocks essentially out of the way and pull them into separate entrances. So that expedites kind of the flow of traffic.
Can I add one thing?
Sure,
That's okay.
Just have to add my 2 cents in somewhere, right? So we will also, if the bond issue passes, engage in the very beginning of the project with the traffic engineer. And it's been more often than not that we've been able to manage the increase in the traffic flow on the site itself through means what you just described and actually improve the traffic patterns around the streets that feed into the school, even with increasing the student population and incoming and outcoming traffic. So.
I have a clarifying question for this gentleman, though. Is your concern about traffic the way in which people wind through the neighborhood to get there, or is it the stacking up? No, it's the stacking up. It's the stacking up. Okay, sorry, it was just a clarification.
You had previously talked about incorporating the operating budget within the bond issue. Is that still on the table?
Still something that's being. Oh.
There you go.
Sorry. It is still something that is being considered with the board.
I'm just going to yell. So as of this moment, you can't tell us how much the operating levy would be? Is that a correct statement?
At this moment right now, no.
So I've heard multiple people use the phrase, you're asking for less money than what we voted down last November. Is that a true statement, yes or no?
Well, as you can see, the project cost is about $15 million less.
Here's the thing. I voted against the issue last November for one simple reason. The largest single cost was interest. The interest cost more than the $170 million in building. So unless your interest assumptions have changed from November, interest would still be bigger than the cost. And on the first slide of the master plan of cost savings, the single biggest expense hasn't been addressed tonight.
So I will address it this way for you. Just like when you buy a house, when your purchase price of your house is $150,000 and you take out a 30-year mortgage, you're not paying $150,000. You're paying $300 and some thousand. A bond issue works the exact same way. So if we take out a bond to build buildings that is $155 million, yes, the interest is going to be just like it is on a house. That doesn't mean that you as a taxpayer are going to pay anything more. So if the bond comes out and it's, your increase in taxes, let's say, I'm making up numbers because I don't know, but I'm making up numbers. If it was $500 a year, for 37 years, you're still paying $500. You're not being asked to pay any more of the interest. So it works just like your house payment does. Whatever you pay for your house or purchase price, that's what gets listed in the paper. That's what you purchased your house for $150,000. It's costing you way more than $150,000 to pay off that house. We're no different as a school district.
Yeah, but there's two fallacies with that. Number one, on my mortgage, I have the option of paying $10 extra per month to principal. On a bond issue, that's out the window. You can't pay a little bit more on a bond levy from that. That's number one. Number two, just like with a mortgage, when you go to your bank to apply for a mortgage, they calculate that interest figure in there. And so you can say, hey, we're only asking for $155 million. If it's the same 37 years and the same 5% interest as November, the bond issue would come to $341 million. You're paying $185 million in interest for a $155 million project. So what other options has the board considered to reduce the $185 million? That's the biggest expense of all of this.
We also have the option of refinancing at any point during that bond issue, just like you can refinance your house. If you have a cheaper interest rate, we can refinance the balance of that and pay back it quicker or at a different rate. So
assume that interest rates go down. What if interest rates don't go down and they stay at the current level? Now we're stuck paying $185 million on a $155 million project. Who I have no doubt you need this. I have no qualms. I think you need new buildings. I just don't want to pay as much in interest as what was proposed last November. Mm-hmm. And I want to find a way to pay less in interest than the building cost from that. Has the board or the administration looked at either one of those options?
And what do you suggest those options are? Because we are bound by the same rules as anyone else that is taking out a mortgage. This is that you think of a bond as taking out a mortgage. So we can't go and say, you know what, we want this mortgage payment at 2%. We don't have the option of doing that. So
you actually do if you change the terms. And I would be here for hours. I'm a financial advisor by trade. And Jack and I have had this discussion many times. Autumn and I have had this discussion many times. 37 years is just longer than a mortgage from that. The problem is you're adding interest only from that. If you reduced it down from a 37-year to a 30-year mortgage on $155 million, you'd save roughly $30 million over the lifetime of the bond levy. Has that been looked at all?
We'll let our treasurer answer that.
Hi, Autumn.
Joelle is correct. This works, a bond issue financing works no different than a house. It is going to cost us money to borrow money. To Mike's point, depending on the term of years that we take out, no different than your home mortgage. He's correct. We can pay a little bit more on our home mortgage. Joelle's correct. We can refinance bonds, and we've done it here. Since 2007, we've saved over $4.5 million for our taxpayers because we refinanced bonds. But when you look at the interest rate and the term, the interest rate, because Ohio law says we have to list an interest rate in the resolution the board passes. So what the board usually will do is we'll say an interest rate that does not exceed a set number. The last bond resolution that was passed was 5%. We wouldn't go above 5%. That didn't mean when it was time to sell those bonds that we'd be at 5%. It meant we weren't going to exceed 5%. We had the authority through board resolution to not exceed that number. So, to your point, Mike, interest would be less if we financed for 30 years. But my home mortgage at home would be less if I financed for 15 years. Not that many people can afford that. So could we put this on for a shorter term? We could. But we would be asking our taxpayers to pay that much more up front. The average taxpayer can't afford that. Plain and simple.
Not as young as I used to be.
No, you're fine. No, thank you for explaining that. I did have a question. First of all, thank you for explaining about reduced expenditures. I think that's helpful for us to know. One thing I didn't understand, though, was could you just explain a little bit more about what other options for increased revenue outside of the taxpayer base have you guys been exploring, since I think that's a fundamental issue that a lot of folks brought up in November that I haven't really heard addressed yet.
You mean for other sources of revenue? Yeah. Well, unfortunately, when you're a public school district, there aren't many options other than grants. And so we do, and Dr. Lauber, you're walking away, but you have the microphone.
Just going over to this side.
I'm just putting you on the spot here. We write several grants a year to fund some things, especially for safety. So you wrote a grant this year, and we got money and bought all brand new cameras, access controls. That is our only other source of revenue. We can't put on like a bake sale and say, hey, come buy these cookies and it generates money for our general fund. We are not permitted to do that. So we do try to supplement some of the other things through the grant writing process to be able to do that. The unfortunate thing about Avon Lake, the unfortunate thing is, in the eyes of the state, we are considered a wealthy district, meaning that our property taxes can fund our schools. And so many of those grants that we apply for and that we go after and they say, you don't meet the qualifications. They like to give grants to schools that they feel on paper are less lucrative, have less the capacity to raise the money locally. So unfortunately, we don't get a lot of them. But we're always applying. And I don't know if, Ned, if you can speak any more to that.
Yeah, just in the last few years, because of the increased focus on safety and security, for example, I've been shocked that Avon Lake has qualified for more grants than normal, because a lot of the wealthier school districts banded together in the suburbs and said, hey, when is it our turn? Because we're self-funding schools, self-funding safety and security measures, and we have the same concerns or greater than other districts. When do we have our share? And so the Attorney General's office and the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission has made several grants available over the last 3 or 4 years that typically would not have been made available to Avon Lake. We applied for those, I think, the day after they opened, because they were all going to run out of money. And luckily, we got our share. Now, we're only talking about, so for example, the annual Attorney General's grant for safety and security, and we're glad that Mr. Yost does this. but it was, I think, for our district this year, we have just shy of $16,000 to spend on safety and security. To upgrade the high school security alarm system to modern standard and have everything working will probably cost us about $37,000 or $38,000. So you're really looking at a drop in the bucket for what could be used. Now, we were very lucky that we applied for and received about $250,000 through the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission grant. I was shocked that that was made available to districts like ours that are usually, 5% state share on state building projects, which is another reason why we can't go through the OFCC on that. So $250,000 sounds great until you realize that $150,000 is what it took to modernize all the exterior access controls on our buildings that were nearing end of life. Some of them are running on Windows 7. And we had to do that because that's our badge access on the exterior of buildings, on doors that have been grafted onto 70-year-old buildings. It had to be done. We found a way to do those exterior access controls at no cost to the district because we finally got some money back from the state. And right there, just after one project, we only had about $100,000 left to spend on cameras, exterior doors, other safety and security measures. So many of the things that we're eligible for don't even touch beyond exterior safety and security, or interior safety and security, classrooms, curriculum needs, personnel costs, the bulk of what goes into a school district's funding we're not eligible for.
So I actually didn't get to hang. I know you ran away, Nick.
Sorry, I can come back.
I'm going to ask you a curious question. Of course. Because you're in good company with this gentleman who's working inside of a system who's struggling with very similar challenges. Yep. And every day we have to ask, how are we generating alternative revenue to keep our hospital going? So I understand your question, but your question I don't think is porting well here. So I am really curious for you to dig into that more, because my job is to help you with that on a daily basis.
And in full disclosure, I write millions of dollars of grants pretty frequently, but I also was a city council member, so I also understand school systems because I understand how they operate. So it is a bit of a loading question because I agree with the superintendent on face value. It is only the grant is yield, but there's other options actually. So corporations can actually provide grants, and so large corporations that operate within the city limits, for instance, could be potentially cost-sharing options. I'm curious to see if that's been explored. There's other options also with the city of Avon Lake to actually partner legislation specifically with sales tax by 3 pennies or 4 pennies for every dollar actually raised in the city of Avon Lake, for instance. There could be a cost share with 1/2 of that going towards Avon Lake schools, for instance, which then potentially would defray some of those costs. So there are other options. I just didn't know what's been explored so far and if we can engage those conversations, because I think that would actually allay some of the discrepancies and fears that a lot of the taxpayers may have.
Yeah, so we have engaged in some of those conversations with the city of Avon Lake. I think the Redwood proposal that we had to them was a win-win for both of us. And so, we've had those conversations. We've also talked to them about they have the ability to write a grant to get lighting. And so we need lighting on our campus. Could they write the grant for us to provide the lighting? We've done some of that as well. Engaging corporations on, coming up with a specific grant? No. We have engaged with our booster groups, though. We have a lot of booster groups. Every club and extracurricular activity we have at Avon Lake has a booster group, and some of them are extremely supportive. Our band boosters are wonderful. Our drama boosters, everything, all the upgrades that we did in the PAC are due to our boosters going out and raising money. So we have a schools foundation that is very supportive of the schools. PTA. So there are other groups that are able to raise funds to do that, and then we have some other groups that aren't so generous, with some of the expenses where we've, asked for support and ways to pay for things, and we were told no.
Hi, sorry to ladder onto the point here, I guess, but is there a possibility as the plan proceeds for members in the community to understand what help is needed, right? How can we tease out from the plan opportunities that might be ripe for things like sponsorship or various donations? I understand, not by way of bake sale, but how do we help the cause? Because I think to the point, it's there's a blind spot in the community of what specifically the donation can go towards. And so how do we bridge that gap in the plan? So maybe it's more, palatable for people to say, hey, I could get my organization to rally behind this. Could there be a wish list phase of the plan?
1,000%. Joelle has a wish list just, without having to go through the project, but no. So that is part of the design process. So when we go to that design process, we do, Ryan does a great job of saying, if you could design your building and money was not an option, and this is a design meeting that we would have with the community. If money wasn't an option, what would you want in your building? And we start putting all these things. And then Ryan goes through a process where we put everything in there, and then he says, okay, Joelle, that building will cost $100 million. Okay, well, we can't afford $100 million so what we do is it's a process called value engineering. So then we look at that wish list and go, okay, what can we not live without? What is really important to the community? And then some of those things that we value engineer out of the project to get it down to the cost it needs to be, at that point we could say, look, we really want this, but we can't afford it. Can you, organization A, or you, company B, please, donate to pay for this so we can put it back into the project? So absolutely, can we come up with a wish list of things once we go through that design phase? And I think, Ryan, you could speak more to that too.
Yeah, I can add to that point too. That makes, that gives you something concrete to talk to people about. It's very difficult to look at the slides we've shown today and really get anybody too excited about, donating to a specific piece of it. So once you get to that point, I've had playgrounds, for example, where local YMCAs had grants that they wrote, and they're like, we'll give you money because we have these grants that will help support this piece of it. There's once you have a plan for your transportation, your circulation on site, there are grants that can kind of help with those types of things. But these are also things that as you're looking at a playground, somebody might say, it is very important for me and my organization to have a very nice playground in our city. This is something I'd help support. So it does, as we go through that design process, give us the opportunity to take stuff that are essentials, define those, and then kind of build on that and get you the best project within our budget and assistance.
I'd like to piggyback on what Dr. Lauber was talking about in terms of school safety. The pictures that you guys showed tonight are wonderful, modern, which is great for our kids. But one of the biggest concerns that I have as a parent in the district is the safety aspects. Can you talk a little bit about how the schools will bring us up to current day standards so that we're very fortunate we live in a very safe community, but this kind of stuff can happen anywhere. So what does that look like within the new plans?
I could talk for hours about that. That is everybody's biggest concern. And that's something that there's a lot of passive pieces that you put within a building. It's how you configure the building. It's how you break up the building into components that are easy to separate, easy to maintain in the case of an event, something of that nature. So there's a lot of passive things you can do within a building footprint. It's also about providing the right type of door hardware. It's about providing the right type of cameras in the right locations so that you have clear and obvious monitoring of the entire outside of the building, inside of the building where you're allowed to by law. And things of that nature so that you have all this technology component. It's also, and as big as anything, it's working with life safety services throughout the whole project so that you're talking to the fire department, you're talking to the police department, you're talking to other civic entities to make sure that all of their offerings, all the stuff they do really well, our buildings help facilitate in case there was ever some sort of an emergency.
So conceptually, and this is why we wanted to show this to you, as Ryan said, these are all the public spaces. So if you came in and had a group, between these public spaces and the academic spaces, this is secured entries. So you're going to have secured entries that people are going to have to get through before they're even going to have access to your kids. Separating bus and car traffic. Do you know how many accidents have been almost accidents where kids are running out in the parking lot to try to get to their bus and almost get hit by a car? So this is a huge safety issue to isolate the bus traffic from the car traffic and have them not interact with one another. In addition, I'm going to tell you this so you're not shocked and you're not angry. Safety and security plans are not public record for a reason. We don't want people to know all the different things that we've put in for safety and security. So when we start in design phase, we're going to talk to you about how many secured entries we are. We're going to talk to you about the secured doors that are going to separate the academic wing from the public spaces. We're going to talk about parking. We're going to talk about having cameras in the building. We're not going to tell you where they are, and we're not going to tell you all of the different security aspects that we're putting in the building for obvious reasons. But know that in design phase is where we talk about all of those things. In my previous district, the last building we designed, there were 3 secured entry points before you even had access to kids. In the case of a lockdown, you had to get through 6 doors before you were going to see a kid and an armed SRO officer who was stationed at the front of the building. So these are all things as part of design, smart design about how do you keep kids safe as possible will all be filtered out in that design phase. But no, those are some of the things that we do because we recognize our buildings are the community's buildings. They're not just the school districts. And so we want our communities to enjoy them at the same time keeping our kids safe and secure.
You've projected to close 3 elementary schools and to consolidate them into 2, which is going to increase dramatically the transportation issue. Buses, personnel, etc. Have you figured out the additional cost that that's going to incur and where those funds are going to come from?
So we will be transporting the same number of kids. So you're not transporting any more kids. So we have 3,600 kids now. If we have 3,600 kids in 3 years when the building's built, we're still transporting the same number of kids. So the numbers of buses needed are not going to change. The number of personnel that we need is not going to change.
For this, back to the safety question, what do you do with like the outdoor spaces or the playgrounds? Like, you know, I trust the buildings are secure, but how do we keep the kiddos safe, you know, in an outside space?
Yeah, I'll take that. So some of it is placement. You place the playgrounds in a spot where they're protected on sides where you can. A lot of it too is the configuration of roads and access drives. You want to provide as much kind of view of the site, you know, from the building and from your SRO office or your front office as to who's arriving on the site. So it's really about being able to monitor locations, and then camera coverage is also very important. So like, for example, I'm on job sites all the time. Sometimes I'm wearing my construction garb, so I'm wearing hooded sweatshirt and boots, and the schools that have a lot of cameras, somebody will come out and talk to me if I'm in the parking lot for too long. So it's about making sure that it's very obvious who's on site, where they're located, and having those kind of control and access points. The other thing you do is you try to, where you can, you know, like certain playgrounds, it makes sense to increase, you know, add some fencing or add some kind of measures to kind of segregate that from you know, other access ways. That's not always the right choice. In certain instances where you're at the back of the site, maybe it is just about how you kind of shape around that or something with, you know, control fencing and things of that nature, but always making sure you have multiple ways to get out of locations and things like that. So there's a lot of, again, back to, that's more passive design for the most part, but then also adding in that technology component as well. So.
We thank you for coming this evening. And again, if you have any additional questions after you leave here, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Thank you very much.